Welcome to Honestly Speaking, a safe place to be unsafe. Live commentary and dialogue from a biblical, logical, cultural, and comical perspective.
Hey, what up, everybody? It's your girl Lee from Honestly Speaking. As per usual, how are you doing? Man, this past week has been bananas. So much is going on. Hopefully, you have a tribe that you could pour into and one that is pouring into you. Whew. If you notice, my platform is kind of changing because I'm doing big things again. That's right, big things again. I'm doing big things. And so, as a result, I won't be producing my videos the same and maybe not as often. Nevertheless, I still feel called to do it. And a part of being called to do it is making sure I talk to my tribe. You know how I feel. Always talk to your tribe. I think belief in fatherhood says protect your life and keep your network popping. Yeah. So this is part 2 of a discussion on mental health and how it impacts certain communities, specifically the African American one, as well as how that intersects with men. Let's dig into this conversation.
Mental health and self-care. What are mental health issues, and do you think POC and Black people understand mental health issues?
People of color.
Yes, people of color.
You said POC. You literally read it word for word.
I literally read it. That's what you told me to do.
Do you think people of color? So, what is in your opinion? Now, you guys know what I do for a living, so I'm going to let you guys talk first. But my question to you is, if you were walking down the street and you saw someone who was obviously experiencing a mental health crisis, and you were with a 5-year-old or 8-year-old, and the 8-year-old said, "What's going on with that person?" How would you describe mental health to that young person? Just like
how I have described it, because I have had to have that conversation with my child. That, the same way sometimes people get sick physically, like a cold, or or they break something, a limb or a finger. Sometimes people get sick and it affects their mind, which comes out in how they behave, comes out in their emotions, and it is very scary. The same way it's scary if you are sick, and they need treatment, and they need love, and they need support, the same way you would need if you're sick.
Right. Anyone else?
Yeah, I tend to jump to automatically to too much trauma, and try to explain what trauma is. Overloading, this is off topic, but not on topic. I think the rap game is just a whole bunch of grown men that are hurting.
You better talk about that.
But yeah, I lean to the spiritual aspect. Sometimes I look beyond the mental illness, and I speak of demon possession. But sometimes it's not demon possession. It literally is just mental overload or mental illness.
Right. I'm so glad you said that. Really quick, as a mental health professional, I would like to tell people I'm also a Christian, you cannot cast out what you need to medicate. Hey, you cannot rebuke what you need to repent of. Hey. And you cannot repent of what you need to cast out. Hey, that's a word. Okay. So I need for everybody to know that. All right. Sometimes you need a pill. Sometimes you need a person. And sometimes you need a priest. Sometimes you need all three. I've seen stuff. I've seen some things leave people, and the people still have schizophrenia. And because as Christians, I'm gonna be honest, we over spiritualize everything. I rebuke the demon of no gas in my tank. No, just stop it.
Just add some money.
What'd you say?
So just add some money to Wawa and get some gas.
Right. Because we do that, what we do is we really, in a way, we minimize God's, not even his ability, but what we do is we miss how God can help heal a person. And we're going to talk about that because God delivers people through natural means as well as supernatural means. And he does it often through community, but I'm tipping my hand a little bit. You were saying about if you saw somebody, Crystal, just to summarize what you said that their mind or their emotions were not well. And Jay said he would explain trauma, like they've gone through something that made them unwell. Okay. Does Marcus or Jonas, how would you explain it to like your
I'll say so many things fall into like mental health. For me, I kind of like revert back to like an education thing of like special education or instead of like they don't call it disabilities, they call it exceptionalities now. But and I always look at it as everyone learns different. Everyone understands things different, and so and that means that, like you have to speak in someone's language for them to understand you. So like it's times where I'm like, I think as I've grown, so at first it was like, man, they crazy, and then it's like, nah, something's going on. It's deeper, and it's some people is that people haven't communicated with them. Like I had a student that people didn't communicate with this student, and so this student, I had them from second and third grade, but now I see them now, and they're like eighth grade, ninth grade, and like still is like a selective mutism where the kid won't speak or talk about won't communicate, even if in pain, he won't say anything. And so, but again, some of that comes from certain traumas, but also from just lack of interaction and relationship.
Marcus?
I've never thought about that. Never had to explain it to anybody, but I think my take on it would be a lack of a strong support system is how I would try to explain it to someone who basically didn't understand, and probably try to use instances of myself where I've had people to turn to and actually talk to about certain things,
right,
versus just trying to go at them alone. Because I think, that's what is a big part of mental health, is having a strong support system. And for someone to be out there, going through trauma, having their trauma have led them out there to where we're looking at them trying to figure out what's going on, it's probably because they didn't have the proper support system. So I think I would, like, to my 8-year-old, explain that versus anything else. But I've never really thought about it until now.
Right. So the thing is, go ahead, Chris.
I think that there are levels of mental health issues. I do think,
ma'am, it was my turn, and you're gonna take that. You're still in my thunder. You're still in my thunder. So health, period, is a spectrum. It's like The Rock, and then it's like, I don't know, like I'll pick somebody fictional, Rasputia. Okay. So you got these two different specimens of humans, and you got one that looks like they're chiseled out. Now, that's physical. So is the same thing. So you have mental health challenges, and then you actually have mental health disorders and crisis. Just because you have a mental health crisis does not mean that you have a diagnosable illness. We have to remember, again, mental health is a spectrum. The statistics show that 1 out of 5 people will deal with a mental health challenge at some point in their life. 1 in 5. I think the issue is the stigma around mental health. We don't want to talk about it. We by and large, we don't know how to describe it. And when we do know how to describe it, it's still something that we want to stay away from. Why, what were you going to say, Crystal, while I look at the next question?
Historically, mental health has been treated in a lot of ways that are not beneficial. You have the history of people being mistreated, extremely mistreated, by medical that were supposed to take care of them, and then you have the most recent extreme of we just don't talk about it. We know cousin so and so is a little different, and we just don't talk about it. We don't acknowledge it. We don't come together and educate ourselves and become that support system for cousin so and so or uncle such and such. We just don't address it at all. I think ignorance has fueled a lot. Even the way they were mistreated in the past was ignorance. Up until now, just the lack of any type of support or any type of help from family members and friends and loved ones. And then you have those situations where people are recently trying to educate themselves and trying to become more aware. And it is hard sometimes because there are different levels. There are the situations where there's a crisis. There are the situations where there's an actual diagnosis. And then there are the situations where there's trauma. And I don't know a human who hasn't been affected by some form of trauma. We've all had.
So trauma, really quick for people who may not know, trauma is an experience that you yourself can have or you can know about that impacts you in such a way that you are no longer yourself. So I'm gonna give you a case in point. Crystal Clear and I used to work with young people in the city who are more likely to murder or be murdered by the age of 25. That's what we used to work with. They're some of the most honest young people on the planet, just blatant to your face, honest. Things that happened. I don't know if you all remember this, but there was a situation on the subway, I want to say about 15 years ago, where a man got on the sub, pulled out a hammer, and just started beating somebody in the head. Just didn't know this person. And you see, like, this was first put cameras on public transportation. And they showed it over and over and over on the news. So much to the extent that I had a student that came to me and said, "Miss, I'm not riding a sub ever again." It traumatized her. Now, that was not her situation. That was not her experience. Other young people watched it and laughed. So it was a traumatic experience, but that doesn't mean that everybody was traumatized by it. Now, how did I approach her? I told her, okay, take the bus. Now, I didn't want to tell her, babe, you do know that the same thing could happen on the bus. I needed her to get home. You understand what I'm saying? I needed her to get home. So as a result, I just said, okay, I support that. And then slowly introduce, well, maybe this, maybe you get on this stop, maybe you go ride with a friend, maybe you don't sit right here, things like that. But she was traumatized. She was forever impacted by that. Trauma is the number one risk factor for the development of a mental health issue. Mm-hmm. It's the number one risk factor for the development of a mental health issue. Does anyone on this Zoom right now know what the number one protective factor against mental health issues is? The number one protective factor. This is crazy.
What is it?
Having a relationship with another human being, a positive relationship with another human being, especially for adolescents. It is the number one protective factor against the development of a mental health issue. If that don't preach, more than church events, more than in religious activity, more than going to the masjid or practicing meditation at a young age or any of that, having a positive relationship with an adult is the number one protective factor against a young person developing a mental health issue. So I say that so that we don't discount small beginnings in your interactions with young people that you see or whatever. You could be the angry man, get off my lawn. You don't even have a lawn. You got a 5x5 patch of grass. They still remember that. They still love you for that. And it's okay that we have those interactions because it shows consistency. And it is not to minimize sports, it's not to minimize religious activities. It's to say that the way you get introduced to those things is through a positive relationship with another human being. That's why you don't hear the gospel unless somebody preaches it. You know, in most cases, sometimes it could be a dream, but in most cases, that ain't the case. You need somebody to kind of tie yourself to. Did y'all want to comment on that before we move on to the next question?
Well, I was just looking at the whole like I guess on trauma and how like we try to help people through trauma, right? And even like today, right? Like I'll have someone tell me like all these bad things about black people in urban areas, and they discount the trauma, right? And so you see everyone's they're marching. They have different forms of demonstrations because of the injustice, right?
Right.
And people say, "Hey, but they're killing themselves, so why should we care?" Right? But the trauma is deeper, and I think what we do in the world, I won't just say in America, is that we look for surface remedies, right? And I think that that's why in America and just the whole idea of like developing black excellence is hard because we aren't digging deep enough to deal with what truly happened to build trauma, and then also the person who was oppressing is not dealing with it either. And I was listening. I forget who it was. We were talking about epigenetics and how like what they do is like you take a rat and you shock the rat and drop peppermint oil. Shock the rat, drop peppermint oil. After a while, that rat, whatever it is, here smells peppermint oil, will be terrified. So what happened was they did a study and they said, "Hey, let's look at the offspring of this rat of these rats." The smell of peppermint oil terrified them. Their offspring. So it's like their children, their grandchildren, their great grandchildren, grandchildren. And so now people are like, "Yo, you got mice? Forget that mouse. Get some peppermint oil," right? And it's like even with black people, there was 339 years of trauma and oppression, and then you're like this. All right, we'll free them, but they still don't have anyone to connect to, right? And then we have Jim Crow, the Black Codes, the KKK. People can't go to parks, theaters, restaurants. You can't go to different neighborhoods. You can't swim in the same pool. You can't even be in the same jail as a white person. All these things are building trauma, and there's no freedom, like no. And then I think we just move through all these different things, and then we switch from lynching, war on drugs, and then we get to this part where it's like, hey. Now the new trauma, well, not the new trauma, the pacted on trauma is we have judges like the guy Mark Sorelli or who and the other guy who sold almost 2,000 kids to prisons. And Donald Trump he's like, let's say these prisons are for profit and they've gone up 140%, 98%, and it's like, but they're in jail for things they didn't do, right? And so we have men in jail and their kids don't have parents, and then the cops are profiling them, and then his trauma is being compacted, and then I go back to the TED talk I was listening to earlier with Dr. Roundtree, and he's like, they say you need a minimum of 10 years to process your trauma, but we've had all these years where we couldn't process the first trauma. What do we do, and how do we move forward when we won't get a sincere apology? And what I mean by that is moving from your comfort to reconcile. So how do we move forward as a community of black people, black and brown people, to, I guess, to make a difference in the areas that we're in.
So in response to that, if anybody else wants to respond, I would say two things. Because someone has a mental health issue, because someone is experiencing trauma, it never excuses wrongdoing that they do. It explains it, but it doesn't excuse. I just want that to be clear.
Oh no, yeah.
I think that oftentimes when Jonas or people who share the same perspective of Jonas say that, what people hear is, so you saying that nothing you do is your fault, and you just, no, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is put in my DNA to have a particular bent to be this particular way. And what I need to do is to heal and be made whole. Now, part of the reason why I think that we have an issue is because our culture has prided itself on not showing that we're hurt. We take limps and turn them into strolls, and then got people trying to copy our swagger, when in reality, we are limping. And they like, oh, you saw that walk? That was a cool walk. He need a new hip. Like that's not right. But we can't show that. We can't show that. So speaking of we can't show that, so we already talked about stigma. So are there any other barriers besides finances? Matter of fact, let's talk about that. Are there any other barriers, if y'all want to get into it a little bit, that keep Black people and people of color from seeking mental health treatment or counseling?
We're not to fail. But go ahead.
Well, my first thing was ignorance, but the second thing is the medical system has not been trustworthy towards people of color. So who of color would go to, first of all, historically, can the people, if the person I'm going to sit before is someone who is in a position of privilege, how will they even be able to help and support me, who doesn't share that same background? And then in addition to that, how can they be trusted if historically they're not trustworthy?
So at some point, I hear you. And at some point, we have to take a risk. I think that, and we have to learn to take healthy risks. I kind of cringe when I hear people say stuff like, we are not our ancestors. Stop it. You're right. You're not. Because you don't have the skills, the patience, the fortitude, or the back to endure what they endured so that we could be here and disrespect them with statements like that. That's a whole nother subject. We'll have to talk about why I was not the biggest fan of the Black Panther movie. I like the point, but who was the African-American protagonist? There wasn't one, but that's a whole nother subject. And I said that because Killmonger says, bury me in this, where my ancestors realized it would be, they would prefer to be jump ship than to be born into bondage. It's like, no, dog, your ancestors wasn't the ones that jumped ship. You only here because your ancestors chose to stay on that ship. They was there, the people in the ocean. Like, it didn't even make sense logically, but it sounded poetic and it fed some angst and anger that we had. And so I wanted to share a video because we're talking about trauma, we're talking about recovery, we're talking about what Crystal talked about, ignorance, and Jonas talked about how the system is. And I want to show this video, and it's about like the escalation of emotion. And this is, I just want us to see this. So let me see if I'm gonna share my screen, share my sound. I'm gonna share my screen. Give me a second. All right, so. All right.
Daddy! What, baby? Blood! What? Blood! Dad! What? Baby did. Baby's got what? Blood! What does he have? Blood! Where? Blood! There! Blood! Blood! Daddy! Blood!
Now watch the explanation. Watch the explanation.
I'm funny. I'm funny. I'm blood. I'm blood. I'm funny. I'm funny. I know, it's so funny. Yeah, it's not funny. Not funny. I'm blood. I'm funny.
So, sorry about that. Let me make sure I turn this off. But we see this, right? Like you saw what happened, right? So what do we see there? The progressive what? Like can we just unpack that for a second? And I remember my professor showed this to me, and it kind of messed me up because it sounded like the young man. Did y'all see him escalate?
Yeah.
So there was an issue. The authorities that be had it under control, but he didn't know that. And he was rightfully crying. And because of their amusement, they laughed at him. And he said, it's not funny. It's not funny. And so to this day, I say, it's not funny. Like if somebody's laughing at something, it reminds me, to the best of his ability, he was crying out, fix this. My sibling is hurting and they're laughing. It's for their amusement. And I think that oftentimes when it comes to mental health issues, you can have individuals who are screaming and crying and people pay no attention because of how they're saying it. They're amused. And that goes back to what Jay was talking about before when he spoke about rappers being hurt. And I think specifically men. Now I'm glad we're on here with 3 men. That is beautiful. I think that, well, I'm gonna just ask y'all, men, do you think that men talk about mental health enough or in a way that's healthy? And then we gotta wrap it up after this.
No, I don't think we talk about it enough. I think it's I mean, think about it. Like I'm gonna take it there because it just makes sense to talk about it. One of the main ways that I'll just say African American men are traumatized and have mental illness is through pedophilia or molestation. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that is laughed at, joked at, and even given a badge of honor. But nobody thinks of the trauma that young man has experienced. He's been exposed to something that is beyond his years. His trust has been broken and thrown away. His innocence has been ripped from him. Now he's on a trek to be possibly a predator, just like the predator that, and it's not like now mind you, it's not justification because
right. Right. We already established that.
Like,
we get what you're saying. You don't have to explain that.
Yeah. So, but it's just like this is like literally from family to family. If the girl is older and let her be pretty or physically figured in a way that is appeasing to the man's eyes, this is a badge of honor in the black community.
So I'm glad you said that. Do you all agree? You know, Charlemagne, the guy from the Breakfast Club, he talked about having been sexually molested when he was younger and how his friends like basically celebrated it, and he didn't realize that it was sexual abuse until he got older. And if you watch The Breakfast Club, he's extremely over sexualized. And one time they have this thing where they have people call in. They called in, and one of the callers is like basically where you get the sound off on the on the host of the show, and they just take it. And one of the callers said, "No, I think that Charlemagne is so sexual because he already spoke before about how he was sexually abused, and now he uses toxic masculinity to disguise the fact that he really is a hurt kid who was basically stifled at a young age sexually." And he was like, "Yo, you might be." So, did y'all want to speak, talk about that? Not necessarily, it doesn't have to be the molestation piece. I definitely agree. It's 1 out of every 3 or 4 females are sexually abused. 1 out of every 5 or 6 men are sexually abused. And remember, that's the okay. So,
Well, I guess I was going to respond to a statement you just made about toxic masculinity. Because me personally, I don't agree with that term.
okay.
And it's,
Tell me why. Tell me why.
so, because of what I just mentioned, all the things in slavery to take your dad away, and so men aren't being taught how to be men from men, but from women. And so the and I think so. Can I be like straightforward? All right, okay, all right, cool. So I remember, so Lupe Fiasco had a song called "Bitch Bad," right? And in this song, he's breaking down like, yo, like these different views of how people see these images, right? And are kind of taught how to either approach a woman and things like that. They're being taught these things, and it's not. And I would say, and it's not just the Black community. And so like they're being taught these things, and but then you see like there's not a man being a man there. So they're taking what they see from the woman that's raising them or who's around them, or I'll say from the neglect of parental guidance, right? And so then this guy grows up, and you're like this, yo, why don't you have a job? Why don't you do anything? Because a woman took care of me, right? And so my expectation is for a woman to take care of me because the man was not there, not allowed to be there, or he was the male, like, or the male was always downgraded, right? And so I think that when we say toxic masculinity, or sometimes people say like a toxic or authoritarian, what's it? Authoritarian. Ah, goodness. Authoritarianism, or the patriarchy. There we go. And I'm like, those things are. Go ahead.
No. I'm not trying to cut you off,
Okay,
man.
yeah. Those things are toxic because it's not men teaching men, and then it's not, and then also it's not women teaching women because, well, sometimes it is, but it's like it's really someone else who doesn't hold your moral or your foundation teaching your kid how to do life.
Right. I will say this. That's, to me, what you described is why it's toxic. It's not true masculinity, it's faux masculinity. It's not real. It's not grounded in truth. It's definitely not grounded in God's truth, and that's what makes it toxic. I'm a person that I do not conflate patriarchy with misogyny. I believe that a man can lead the home. We can be equals, but we just have very different functions. I don't see what's wrong with that. That's not taking anything away from who my husband is. But I have an issue with how some people who were hurt then started creating a lot of these terms like you said. And now all of a sudden, misogyny and patriarchy are the same thing. Wait,
Yeah.
like, no. And I know I'm a former feminist, womanist. Yeah, still very much womanist, but that ain't right. I do not have to step on my brother's head if I'm going to stand tall. If I love him, he will more likely put me on his shoulders. That's really how, if he's healthy. And when he's not healthy, love includes correction. So when I say toxic, I don't mean you did something I don't like, or I'm trying to undercut your feet. I mean the ways of unhealthy masculinity, the things that are unhealthy mental behaviors and mental mindsets that are passed on to men and even to women, but about men. That's what I say. So I agree with I agree with you about these terms, but when I say toxic, that's what I was talking about. Marcus, do you want to speak to that?
About the lack of, what was the original question? We went left. I kind of got lost.
We were talking about the lack of why do you think men do you think men talk about mental health? Why or why not? And Jay brought up,
No,
and then he tied it into like labels, trauma, and men not even coming in contact with enough healthy relationships with men.
right. I got caught in that rabbit hole because it was identifiable. I was like, oh, yeah, he's speaking on some stuff. And I just was like, oh, and I forgot where we started at. But yeah, I feel like it's seen as a weakness when you start talking about mental health, or if you let it be known that you're vulnerable. You can't be vulnerable as a man and still be considered a man where we come from. So the minute you show a sign of weakness, it's like, oh, look at Buddy. You sit here and not man up, for lack of a better word. That's what they call it. Man up. Suck it
You
up.
see, you see, Jerron hit you with a clap. He clapping for that. He like, yeah, he's clapping for that.
But that's really what it is. It's like you don't, and especially if you don't see anyone, like he said, there's no one there to lead you. So no one's showing you the proper way to deal with these emotions. And rejection is the thing that makes men lose control. They don't know how to deal with, we don't know how to deal with rejection properly. So all that other stuff, like, we're not going to talk about mental health and be vulnerable and
why is that? We're gonna go overtime on this. I already done talked.
Why is what?
I hit a vein.
I'm saying some of the stuff I want to say.
Right. Like, so where do you think this came from? I have my, like, from the research that I did, but where do you think this comes from?
It's all learned from someone, but it's learned from someone, but it's not learned from someone in a healthy space. So it's learned from another man, but it's learned from another man who's been traumatized, who hasn't dealt with his trauma. So he passes this misinformation on to his little brother, his little cousin, his son, whatever, and it goes all the way back to trauma. Like you said, slavery.
Jerron is preaching in the comments.
Yeah. Exactly.
Jerron is preaching in the comments.
I was like, yo, I was like this, ooh. I was like, ooh.
I knew Jonas
I was like this, I'm typing this
joke.
Like, yeah. Yes, Jerron, right, slavery. I mean, if you're a boy who has to watch someone rape your mom, that causes trauma. Or you have to watch someone do that to your daughter, or watch someone and see how they just like tore apart the fabric of identity, right? And I'm like this, like, what was I'm sorry, I gotta look this up real quick. There's a quote that I heard today, and it's like, where is it? Here it is. Okay, I can't find a quote. Never mind. Forget I said that. Anyway, but like, yeah, they're taking away the identity of the person. So then you pass that on a generation. So a woman saying like this, well, this is what a man did to me, right? And she's passing this thing on, or a man's passing, this is what happened to my grand, or this is what happened to so and so, right? And so these things, and it goes back to that epigenetic, where it's like you're passing on this hurt, almost in a genetic way, and you got to figure out, how do I deal with it? Like this one, some people, they learn it so early where when you're like this, I can't talk, and like they say that you from age 0 to 8, like in my education class when I was at Eastern, they're like, yo, you learn everything you're gonna learn about life from 0 to 8, and then you're building on those concepts, right? And so if 0 to 8 is traumatic, and then it's like now you're building on concepts you didn't even know how to articulate. And so you like, if it's for those who taught you like this, you go into a second grade class or a third grade class, because you're like 9 years old in third grade, and you're like, yo, why are they acting like that? They don't know either. It's the stuff that someone placed them in front of a TV so they can do whatever they need to do. And so they were just picking up images of, this is how you process love. This is how you process gratitude.
Now you said slavery, and I do agree. But what about the people who were never slaves, and they feel, men who were never slaves, and they feel the same way? I've talked to Hispanic, well, not to say Hispanic, because a lot of Hispanic people, my Puerto Rican, Dominican, Cuban brothers and sisters, we are cousins. I just want to say that. But a lot of them were say the same thing. When I talk to Asians, be it Asians from the Orient or Indian, a lot of times it's similar. So how is it that it's slavery and for Black men, but we see that other men who are not Black are experiencing the same things that you're talking about?
I think that I was sitting here listening, and I was thinking the same thing. Like it's not just something that affects the African American community. It affects everyone. Today, I was learning about toxic stress. And basically, toxic stress is the result of childhood abuse that causes activation of your stress response symptoms, overactivation of your stress response symptoms. And you're not able to properly process or respond.
Hold on for a second. We talking about the brothers, and then all the brothers just gonna mute they screens though. That's crazy. So, no, I'm just messing. It was like, I ain't trying to hear y'all. We
knew
talk,
she was gonna say something.
gonna go talk about us. Get the heck out of here. We ignore it.
Okay, they might have needed a second. I was letting them have a moment, had a second. Okay.
I know, I'm just messing with you. Go ahead, Crystal. Talk about taxes.
But literally, I was learning about it today, and just how it affects children, and why it's so important for us to understand the development of the human brain, and how basically that portion of your brain that responds to trauma, when it is overactivated and not and there is no treatment or healthy way of processing that overactivation, and no safe and healthy relationship for that processing to happen within, it manifests into a grown-up who also doesn't know what to do. And when their child goes through an experience, they can't help their child, which manifests into another grown-up. And it's just this cycle of not understanding who we are, how fearfully and wonderfully made we are, and how careful we need to be with our development, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. I think when I do think about slavery, I think about the fact that the reality was, because they were not considered human, they weren't even given the space to process I don't even know what the word is for it, the amount of horrible, evil things that were happening to them. They had to be able to get up and survive. At some point, for our people, it became about surviving. because there wasn't even the space for them to figure out or learn how to thrive. Now, I don't know for anyone else, but that's what I see as like the cycle.
I was going to just jump in, like, so I think, Leigh, like, so the relationship between people from Thailand and China is similar to black and white relations.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was working at a Chinese exchange program, the guy who worked directly for me, he was from Thailand, and the kids would say things to him that was so like mean and nasty, right? Just because he was from Thailand, and a lot of them had to get checked because like, yo, this is an adult, right? So whatever is in you guys' history, this guy's the one who's making sure you get to where you need to go and do what you got to do. So you need to like put some of that stuff aside. And and these were teenagers, so who were just like blatantly challenging this person because they felt like this guy, because he was from Thailand, was lesser than them. Now, also, they were wealthiest kids in China, so also.
I just want to say that the othering of people has to do with the wickedness in humans' hearts. We other all the time. Women other men, men other women, men other women, especially Black women. Yeah, especially Black women. Like, I think that Black women, there is empirical evidence that Black women are the most hated people on this planet. And I'm not trying to say that to minimize what anything happens to my brother. I'm talking about empirical data down to who marries who. Majority of African American men marry women that are lighter than them. We spoke about slavery, and that's literally what triggered these particular thoughts. Like, it just is like we do. I see you, Jerron. I see he raised his hand. Like, wait. And it has a lot to do with what's being fed to men, and even the way women see themselves usually comes from, like, even fashion. Can we just talk? Women don't run the fashion world. So when people are like, yo, why all the jeans got the butt out? They didn't make the jeans.
Right.
They didn't make the jeans. Some dude designed them. And I'm not even saying this dude was a dude that liked women, but some dude literally designed these clothes to accent certain things. So Black women are literally it's empirical data on it. And that doesn't excuse the wounds that Black women inflict on Black men. Like, I've seen it. I've seen it. I've seen it. I've seen men abuse women so that the women don't acknowledge their power. And then I've seen women verbally and emotionally abuse men because they needed to feel empowered. I've seen it. And it's horrible and it's ugly and it's wicked. So my question is, how? Wait. You already know what to do. Like, subscribe, share. Subscribe, share, and like. Just make sure you do all three. And remember, love God, love your neighbor, take care of yourself.